joining us this morning is Batangas 1st District Representative Leandro Leviste. Good morning, Congressman, and thanks for joining us here on Morning Matters.
Morning, Pauline. Thank you for having me.
All right, well, right off the bat, Congressman, tell us how should this flood control budget be realigned? You pointed out that 250 billion pesos has been set aside already for flood control, while only 13 billion is for classrooms. How much exactly of that flood control budget should be shifted to education?
I think almost all of it can be, because using my own district's example, many of the proposed flood control projects don't have feasibility studies and are expansions on earlier phases that were already damaged by recent storms. I propose that one of the ways that we fund further flood control projects is by asking the contractors of the previous projects that have been damaged to cover the costs of repairing and extending their flood control projects. If we do that, then we can have both flood control projects and classrooms.
So you're saying, Congressman, all 250 billion be shifted for education for classrooms, leaving flood control with zero allocation for next year?
During the congressional hearing on Monday, I proposed 80% or 200 of the 250 be shifted to education and, if possible, by the DOF, lower taxes. But I think it's going to be a longer discussion in Congress where exactly it goes. But I think the important thing is that it is not wisely spent on flood control, given the perceived systemic corruption in DPWH. This has also been echoed by others who have called for a suspension of flood control projects. We still need flood control, but if we give the same funds to DPWH, at best, we will only get 50% of our money's worth, because of the inefficiencies in implementing these projects. And at worst, it might end up being ghost projects, just like what was seen in some other districts in the past few days.
Well, Congressman, as you lobby for this in the House, for sure many congressmen would still want to have those flood control projects in their districts. How will you counter that and argue realistically that the classrooms are more urgent? And how can you get your colleagues to agree to that realignment?
I think the President has made education a top priority since the State of the Nation address, and that one of the preconditions perhaps for new flood control projects in a district is going to be a comprehensive audit on the quality of the existing flood control projects. Much of the problem is in the bidding process by the district engineers, and if the same district engineers are going to bid out new flood control projects, you can bet that it's going to be the same quality. And so perhaps we can say you can have a flood control project if every flood control project implemented by your district has been vetted as being of good quality.
Well, you personally inspected more than 1 billion pesos worth of flood control projects in Batangas recently, Congressman. What did you see on the ground?
I saw that almost all of them had some, if not a lot of damage, and that damage would be caused by substandard design on the projects, where the structures are held onto the riverbed by sheet piles, which appeared to be shorter than they should have been based on the DPWH's program of works, which is perhaps one way that the contractors were able to significantly save on the costs. Had they not been torn away by recent storms, then we would not have known that the sheet piles were shorter than designed. But thankfully, we can now verify that many of them were, which is, I think, a grounds for further charges to be filed against the flood control contractors.
And was that consistent, Congressman, among most of the projects that you inspected? And among them are along the rivers of Lian, Palico, Binambang, and Pansipit.
I'd say that the damage was consistent across all the projects. As to the actual non-compliance on the
quality,
DPWH program of works, the audit is still ongoing because, of course, we want to be precise when we make these claims. And as to why the contractors were compelled to find a way to save on the cost of their projects, perhaps many's guess is as good as mine. But this is also consistent with the comments that are made by others in other DPWH districts.
And what about your constituents, the residents of Batangas, when they see these projects, knowing that billions were spent, particularly yung sa Diokno Highway pa lang, Congressman, ano? I mean, the roads there were just newly constructed and yet they were already washed away after Typhoon Krising. So it goes to show that they can't even withstand a single season of a typhoon.
That's right, and I think that taxpayers are generally very frustrated now because Filipinos pay some of the highest value-added taxes in Southeast Asia, and yet we're not getting what we pay for in taxes. So one of the things that I proposed by our recent congressional hearing was that some of the savings on flood control can even be used for lower taxes. But the DOF said we should try and fund other things first. In which case, I would say that education is going to be infrastructure that the public can benefit from more surely and immediately, because we all know about how the ratio of students to classrooms in this country is well above the recommended levels, resulting in some schools even imposing shifting on their students. And so if we can divert the stated amount of the flood control budget towards classrooms, and if we implement the classroom construction efficiently, we could possibly even solve almost all of the 165,000 classroom shortage identified by the Department of Education.
But Congressman, you did point out earlier the lack of feasibility studies in all these flood control projects, particularly in Batangas. So the question is, how do these projects get approved? Who signs them off and who should be held accountable? Is it DPWH? Is it the contractors? Is it the district engineers, regional directors? Sino po ba talaga ang accountable dito?
The DPWH Planning Office is the one that identifies and submits the projects for approval of Congress. And in the past years, these have been approved by Congress. And I think now, with awareness of this issue, Congress would be good to scrutinize whether the projects that are proposed have both been studied and are backed up by a track record of implementation by the DPWH districts.
Well, let's talk about the 2026 budget. I believe you've already taken a look at it, Congressman. What did you see in terms of the DPWH's proposed flood control projects in Batangas? And would you say some of them are questionable?
Yes, to use one example, there's a proposal for another 150 million pesos on the Lian River when the first phase of the Lian River flood control project already had some damage, and it was admitted by the DPWH that this new phase didn't have a feasibility study, and so they themselves volunteered to take it away. There are also flood control projects in other towns of Batangas that didn't have feasibility studies at all, and it makes one question why the DPWH is so keen on prioritizing flood control when the president himself said in his speech that he wants to prioritize solving the classroom shortage. So I'm optimistic that with political will behind it, we will be able to divert a lot of these funds into education and make significant advances. Because I was told by the Department of Education officials in a recent briefing that the reason why we've capped the budget for classrooms at 13 billion is because we were not able to find funds for more than that. But suddenly now we have, and therefore we can have reason to hope that we can solve the classroom shortage.
Right. But Congressman, itong mga flood control projects, you also mentioned that you talked to some engineers and even they said that these projects won't reduce or solve flooding in Batangas. What made them say that? And are these engineers from the DPWH itself?
We've engaged former DPWH engineers to do an audit on these projects. And if the projects are properly implemented, then most of them can, except that they have been damaged even just after the first typhoon season. So that's what I mean by saying that they won't benefit the district. And I think that's a even more generous example than in other districts, because it's already been documented that there are other districts in the country where there are even ghost flood control projects.
And Congressman, aside from flood mitigation, well, the DPWH has also outlined different proposed projects per district. And in the first district, correct me if I'm wrong, kasama ang major road projects like the Tuy Diversion Road and the Tagaytay na Sugbu Road. Do your constituents feel that these are actual projects that should be prioritized?
Definitely, we need both flood control and roads. The problem is DPWH's implementation of them. And to use the example of the roads that you mentioned, one of the other things we inspected is that some of these roads are being built with asphalt instead of concrete, which is not appropriate for a flood-prone area, which the locals actually reached out to DPWH to ask that these roads not be built as asphalt instead of concrete, to which the DPWH had its own reasons for saying that they were encouraged to make them using asphalt instead of concrete. So there's certainly a lot more worth questioning in DPWH projects than just flood control. And I look forward to the results of this first wave of scrutiny on flood control projects in hopes that this would lead to more systematic improvements in how DPWH selects and implements its projects.
But going back to the defective projects, you did say that contractors should be forced to go back and fix them, but we're not really sure if there are mechanisms for that. So are you prepared, Congressman, to file any kind of legislation or maybe support other legislation that would strengthen accountability for contractors and even DPWH officials?
That's a very good point, because the DPWH projects do have a 1-year warranty after they are completed. And some of the damaged flood control projects in my district have been completed in less than 1 year. So we can certainly make claims, except the DPWH engineer said that they cannot make claims on projects damaged due to force majeure, as if heavy rains are unforeseen and unexpected when you're designing flood control projects. So I think it's also important that not only the audit be done by independent parties, but the warranty claims be done so that we can really run after the contractors by people who have no reason to want to protect the contractors. And maybe 1 year of warranty is too short. And one way that we can also get more worth out of the money of taxpayers is by having new standard contracts in DPWH that have more means to run after the contractors for a longer period of time.
And Congressman, it is your first term in office, and I'm curious because you are also a vice chair of the Appropriations Committee. Personally, what are some of the concrete steps you are taking to make sure that every peso is allocated for, and to make sure that these budget allocations don't go to waste?
First, on behalf of my district, I will not propose adding or making amendments for new flood control projects that are not backed up by feasibility studies, and while the district engineers have not proven that they have gotten the full worth of taxpayers' money off the existing flood control projects. And second, when it comes to DPWH procurement in general, I'm going to make sure that there will be nothing illegal happening when it comes to how these projects are being procured. The consumers and the public should get their money's worth from the budgets that are given to DPWH districts.
And finally, Congressman, what is the current status of House Bill number 27? That was your very first bill as a congressman, and it seeks to provide a 1,000 peso monthly allowance for all students from kindergarten to college. What's the status of that, and how feasible is that, Congressman?
Thank you for this question, because the Basic Education Committee, of which I am also the vice chair, just had our organizational meeting this Monday, and we're supposed to have our next meeting to tackle bills in the coming weeks. And one of the inspirations for this bill is that there's so much waste in DPWH. Initially, I was told that there's no big amount of the budget that can be realigned, but it seems like the DPWH was so ready to propose 250 billion plus of spending on flood control. So certainly we can fund a lot more educational initiatives. I would say that classrooms can be funded immediately, and after that, additional support for teachers, operating expenses of schools, and allowances for students. We have piloted it in our own district and have seen that the students are making good use of it because it costs a lot to go to school in the first place. So any additional assistance given to them does help them on those expenses. And that if we can hopefully roll it out using existing programs even before the law is passed in the next few months even, then it could hopefully help build the case for a more expanded program enabled by the law. But that we are, of course, going to work through all possible ways, even before the law is passed, to implement this so as to increase the chances that the law can be passed and the program funded permanently.
Well, we will continue to monitor that. But for now, thank you very much for joining us and thank you for your time. That was Batangas 1st District Representative Leandro Leviste.